So today we will have this guest talk from Sayantika, who has a lot of expertise and was colleague of me. So she's doing her grad study in University of Florida, and she's an expert of Indian science fiction and also Asian American literature as well. And the temporality and futurity that can be found from mostly Indian science fiction and Indian science fiction as well. So as we watched and discussed a little bit about Ms. Marble last class, so we'll have her talk, which will explain the history of India and Pakistan partition, which I briefly touched in my last lecture. And also, she also want to talk about this another Netflix drama, Never Have I Ever. So some of you I know are interested in this drama and wrote your paper about it as well. So even though you haven't watched it yet, still we can see like this broad landscape of Indian American politics and literature and arts in contemporary American society. All right, so okay. So we'll have like 20 minutes each of her talk first, and then we'll have 10 minutes Q&A with her, and then we'll have our usual discussion, group discussion thing. So, all right, are you ready, Sayantika? You're yeah. Hello, how are you?
Hi, doing well. How are you?
Good, good. How's the storms and everything there in Florida?
Gainesville wasn't that impacted by the hurricane, so we got saved. But obviously, Fort Myers and other parts in Florida, the people over there, they were not that fortunate. So yeah, but hopefully things will be all right. Thank you for asking.
Okay, great, great. I'll give you the co-host, right? So you can share.
Yeah, I was just about to ask for that.
Yeah, so yeah, the floor is yours, and you can go ahead. We'll welcome Sayantika Chakraborty with a round of applause. Right.
Okay. For some reason, it's not letting me share my screen. So did you give me the access? I guess you did.
Let me check. Can you try again?
Yeah.
If it doesn't work, I will you can just upload it to the chat room so I can share here from this laptop. We can try that again as well if we can share.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I think we have time constraints. So instead of trying again and again, I'll probably just do that.
You still cannot share your screen? Doesn't work?
Nope.
Okay. Yeah, if you share the file in the chat room, I'll open it here.
I also emailed you. Did you get the email?
Let me check.
I mean, if you can show it from your end and navigate the slides, that works as well. So they can have access to one big screen as I go through the slides.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you so very much. Okay, so we already lost like 4 minutes. So without further delay, I'd dive right into my interpretation of Miss Marvel.
Yeah, but
Um,
don't worry too much about time. We can manage it. So yeah.
okay, thank you so much for saying that. Okay, so first of all, thank you for having me. As a woman of color from South Asia, I'm from India. So I have always wanted a woman of color superhero. So when Miss Marvel came out, I was really, really excited. Um, but I kind of had a mixed response to the politics of representation in Miss Marvel, the one that I have titled my put as the title of my presentation as well, because I thought that Miss Marvel did a fantastic job in breaking stereotypes, but at the same time, there have been things about the South Asian community or the Pakistani American community in general that Miss Marvel probably didn't get so much right. So I'm going to talk about the ambiguities surrounding the representation of Miss Marvel and the South Asian or the Pakistani American community in Miss Marvel in general. And then obviously we'll have the Q&A. And honestly, I must admit, within 20 minutes, I don't think I'd be able to do justice to every thought that I had while watching Miss Marvel, but would still try, at least I'd still try my level best. So thank you for being here. You can move to the next slide. Okay, so this is something that I really, really wanted to talk about during my presentation. So this is the issue of representation versus rehyphenated presentation. This is something that I read in one of the very eminent post-colonial thinkers, Sayantika Chakraborty Spivak. I have mentioned her name there. So she talks about this issue about representation versus rehyphenated presentation. The first, as I have discussed in the next sentence, is political representation or stepping in someone's place. And the second, rehyphenated presentation, is placing the subject or the person who is talking about their representation or their community in that place. Let me give you a basic example. For instance, someone from the white community talking about a Black woman, that would be falling into the category of the representation, the political representation, because obviously a white man talking about a Black man's struggle will obviously not be able to capture the nuances of the ordeal or the difficulties that a Black man goes through in their everyday life. So that would fall into the category of representation. But when a Black man would talk about his everyday struggle and his identity and his, other features in his community, that would fall into the category of the second one, rehyphenated presentation. And we have to think about that in Miss Marvel, because obviously there is, one of the co-creators, she's from Pakistan, but at the same time, she also has an American heritage. So I thought this quote by Spivak from her very famous essay, Can the Subaltern Speak, is really, really important when it comes to the politics of representation. So the quote reads as, each filmic or academic utterance must be analyzed not only in terms of who represents, but also in terms of who is being represented, for what purpose, at which historical moment, for which location, using which strategies, and in what tone of address. I think all of these are super relevant when we dissect and talk about Kamala Khan's identity and obviously the politics of representation in Miss Marvel. So this binary between representation versus rehyphenated presentation also goes back to the idea of Orientalism, the very famous book written by Edward Said, I think somewhere around 1976 or 1978. So he talked about this ever operating binary existing between East and West. So obviously he calls East Orient and calls West as Occident. And obviously to him, and this notion is still in place, the idea of East or Orient is an idea to West that has a history and a tradition of thought, imagery, and vocabulary that have given it reality and presence in and for the West. So obviously the idea of Orient or the East is more like a homogeneous identity for West, and they have constructed a discourse around East, and they kind of perpetuate that discourse whenever they try to represent or talk about someone from the communities not belonging to the United States, the minority or the marginalized communities. Next slide, please. Okay, so as I said that I had kind of a mixed response when I watched Miss Marvel. So I'm not saying that they have got everything wrong in my interpretation. There are definitely something that that are appreciable, that are worth praising, because there are some stereotypes that definitely break. So obviously the first is brown girl from Jersey City saving the world. And then obviously the portrayal of Islam and the Muslim communities in a positive light, especially after the events of 9/11, and when this really conventional idea going on that always interpreted any Muslim or as terrorist or in some way associated their link with Osama bin Laden, right? So in this web series, actually they are doing something really appreciable, something wonderful, because they are talking about the religion of Islam or the Muslim communities in a different and obviously a positive light, a heroic light rather. And obviously the third point, it goes against an all-white superhero cast of MCU. And whenever I think about this, I really laugh because they have two white superheroes named Chris, as if they fell short of names when they are actually thinking about the superheroes. Anyway, obviously the fourth point is the solidarity in the community, and something really, really positive that they did was the depiction of Imam of the mosque, who really helped Kamran and Bruno, I think in the last episode, to escape. That was something really, really unconventional, because otherwise in the religion of the Islam, the Imam, the head of the mosque, he is always this man who adheres to the patriarchal notions and always goes by the book. But here the Imam, he actually takes liberty, and his character is flexible. He steps in to help a white man, a white man called Bruno, and obviously Kamran, so that they could have their mission accomplished. And of course, the idea of female solidarity, that is also something that is really, really significant in Miss Marvel. And I think the best example of that was the relationship between Muniba, Kamala's mother, and obviously Kamala. I mean, initially, I kind of felt that Muniba was a stereotypical character because she was being portrayed as a very strict mother, which is against a recurrent trope in many of the series where the protagonist is usually either an American Indian or American Pakistani, and the mother has this very strict disciplinarian attitude, and that kind of originates from the very conventional and strict South Asian family background. If you have watched Never Have I Ever, you know how strict Devi's parents are. Her mother is, sorry. And obviously, in Miss Marvel, we can see that it's not the father, it's actually the mother who always tries to restrict Kamala from pursuing her goal. But by the time she actually gets to know about the power her daughter possesses, she actually becomes an ally to Kamala. So that is also something I found really interesting. The fifth point is the reference to Kamala's cultural heritage using the songs from Bollywood movie. That was really amazing. I think the creators, they really outdid themselves when they did that, with frequent references from all these Bollywood, which is the Indian film industry, the Bollywood songs, and obviously those Urdu and Hindi words. That was also really, really commendable. And what I really liked, that they didn't translate the Hindi and the Urdu words in the web series. They didn't translate them into English. So it is about giving the international audience an exposure to a foreign language, a language that the protagonist speaks in the series, or at least she has that heritage going back or tracing her roots back to Pakistan, even if she's born in America. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is where I think it became problematic for me. I mean, I really like those positive aspects that I just highlighted. So what I found problematic is Kamala's potential link with the Jane. So obviously there was reference for the origin of Kamala's power being ambivalent. And I thought that the reference to Jane was probably a little bit like going overboard on the part of the creators, because the jinn in Islamic folklore, they are called gods other people, and they also have a different origin which can be compared to Satan and obviously the fall of the angel. So that has a parallel with the biblical the fall of the man story in Bible. So I have talked about it in the second point. So obviously the jinn, they were also shunned from heaven, because like Lucifer or Satan, the leader of the jinn community was called Iblis, which if you translate into English from Arabic is translated as he who despaired. So the jinn called Iblis, he decided to go against Allah or the Islamic God's wishes, and um, uh, decided to kind of cast a war against the human race. So obviously this has a strong parallel with the Satan, Lucifer, and the Bible, Christ, and the fall of the angel or fall of the man story. So obviously in Islamic folklore, the jinn, they are responsible for creating disharmony and damage. And they are like fire. They act like fire, they get ignited suddenly, they behave erratically, and they destroy whatever lie in their path. So obviously this problematic connection with the jinn definitely did upset the Muslims or the people or the followers of Islam. And I was just going through some Twitters and some newspaper articles that got published in Pakistan and in India. And people were really, really upset because they thought that the creators, they did a commendable job creating a brown female superhero. But at the same time, they're also trying to maybe um, like portray her in a negative light, because obviously her association with the jinn, that is problematic. Um, in the defense of the creators, they try to kind of do the damage control when they don't talk about much about the gene connection of Kamala in the later episodes. But I really didn't get the logic behind the idea of having a connection with the gene in the series. So that's my interpretation. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is like when we have to address the elephant in the room, the inaccurate portrayal of partition. I mean, obviously, the partition is considered one of the most significant historical events in the history of South Asian subcontinent, specifically Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh. And it is still central to the modern identity. And I mean, it has branded painfully onto the regional consciousness by memories of an almost unimaginable violence. I mean, we have noticed or we have seen that in Miss Marvel a little bit, but obviously the idea of partition or the event was much bigger than it has been portrayed. So what I felt about the partition event, it was great because in a way, a series is talking about a brown female superhero and also talking about her ancestry, her history, her legacy. And obviously, they are trying to trace her routes back to Pakistan, and they probably cannot do that without having a reference to partition. But I put in a question like whitewashed, because I thought the clear-cut binaries that they did between the British and the Hindus and Muslims, it was more like the two polar opposites. The British, they are the evil, they are on one side, and the good Hindus and Muslims who were actually at the receiving end were always victimized. But that was not the case, because yeah, it's true that the British, they played a huge part in partition, obviously. And it's true that the British had the divide and rule policy. That is how they ruled India, which before partition for 250 years. So obviously they played a significant part in the gradual erosion of the shared traditions that existed between Hindu and Muslim communities. But what Miss Marvel didn't take into account is the role or the participation of the political leaders from the Hindu communities and the Muslim communities. Um, so obviously the two nations, India and Pakistan, they have two different historiographies when it comes to partition. The Indian historiography believes in some different aspect of the partition, and Pakistan has a different idea of it. And that has to do with the different political leaders and the different aim or different goals that they had in their mind. I won't go into the details of all the rigorous, intense discussion or features of the partition, but just FYI. So these three leaders, Jinnah, I have mentioned their names here. So Jinnah, he was from the Muslim community. He obviously sided with the Muslim people. So he was one of the most responsible politicians for the creation of Pakistan. And for India, it was Gandhi, and then it was Nehru, the Hindu leaders, who were responsible for the partition. And when I say that India and Pakistan has different historiography, um, funnily, actually, Jinnah, he is kind of celebrated in Pakistan and he's called the father of the nation. But if you ever talk to any Indian guy or girl who is aware of the partition about Jinnah, they would tell you that how much they hate him because he's like an evil person in India. Again, if you talk about Gandhi and Nehru in Pakistan, they are the evil people because they created partition. But if you talk about them in India, they are still celebrated and they are not villains like Jinnah is in India. So these two nations has this very nuanced, rich and complex idea of the history of partition, something that I think was whitewashed and I would say partly inaccurate. And at the same time, I would say that it could have been more nuanced, more critically tackled. And obviously, that is where I think Miss Marvel got it a little wrong. Though I love the quote when Kamla's Nani tells her that my passport is Pakistani, my roots are in India, and in between all of this, there is a border marked with blood and pain. People are claiming their identity based on an idea some Englishman had. So I have issues with that particular sentence that people are claiming their identity based on an idea some Englishman had. It's not about the idea some Englishman had. It's also about the ideas the political leaders and obviously the people of India and Pakistan had, and they envisioned before partition happened, and it obviously split the continent into India and Pakistan. So I thought that describing the idea of partition vis-a-vis a single axis of racism and inequalities, that was something really something like stereotypical on the creator's part in Miss Marvel. So yeah, so in a nutshell, these two were the two things I had major reservations with when I first watched Miss Marvel. And obviously, as I said at the beginning of the presentation, that I really, really liked the way it also tried to break or bend or subvert some traditional canonical ideas or some stereotypes. But at the end, I would say that in spite of those honest attempts, the idea of the politics, partition, and Miss Marvel's or Kamala Khan's identity has some ambivalent or ambiguous streaks attached to it. That was the end of the presentation, something that I really wanted to talk about. Now I'm really excited for the Q&A you might have for me.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful. Thank you. Okay, so yeah, I also have some questions that I would like to ask you, but I'll save it for so my students can ask the first round of questions. So is there anyone who wants to ask the questions to Sayantika? You can come up here if you want to directly talk to her, but if you just stay there, I will, deliver the question to her as well. Yeah.
It's like targeted for kids or adults? What do you think the target audience was of making this one?
Could you able?
Okay, yeah. No, I couldn't. So could you please repeat your question?
Yeah, the question was what do you think about the target audience of these this drama series in terms of the age? Like, do you think that it's mostly targeted for like young kids, or like even like including adults audiences as well?
That's an interesting question. I mean, I have been thinking about the audience for a little while, and I was having a conversation with one of my colleagues the other day, and he was saying that, and I also agree with that. I think initially, probably it was targeted mostly at the young adults or the teenagers or something, because MCU and everything. But because of the cultural depiction, and specifically because of the reference to partition, which is, I would again say, it's something unprecedented in a series like this, considering it has an international audience. So for that, I think the adults, they were also interested in it. And I was just going through the IMDb reviews, and people there are fighting over so many issues. The issue of representation, partition, and as I also said, that there are people on Twitters, they are also like going crazy with the inaccurate portrayal of partition. So I think it kind of has like a really larger audience, both adults and teenagers and young adults. I would say that.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yeah, Matthew? Yeah, please.
So, hi. This
Hi.
Hi. Despite its flaws and how you said it was like kind of a representation in a way, would you still consider Miss Marvel to be like a positive overall and like a step in the right direction, or do you think it was like a little bit of like a sidestep more?
I would say that it has been a welcome change or a positive step in that direction, because I think the protagonist Kamala Khan, she is also going to be a main character in the upcoming Marvel movie with Captain Marvel, which is set to release in 2023. And in spite of the flaws inherent in the web series, I would still say that it's a positive direction, because it still takes into account people or a superhero from a minority community. So yeah, I think it does that.
Okay, thank you.
Of course.
So do you think your kind of explanation between representation and rehyphenated presentation? So do you think the creator of this drama is Bisha K. Ali, who's a Pakistani the British person, right? So she, as herself British, the Pakistani British, do you think this drama belongs to rehyphenated presentation, not representation?
Okay, so probably I have to bring in some post-colonial reference here, and I hate to bring in theory, so I try to explain it in as simple terms as possible.
Right.
I think for any post-colonial subject, and for the person you mentioned, that she also has British heritage, and if I'm not mistaken, one of the creators for Miss Marvel, she is born in New Jersey, but she has her roots in Pakistan.
Yeah.
So obviously that is also something we need to take into consideration. So for someone who has Pakistani heritage but has been born and brought up in New Jersey in the United States, they obviously will have multiple identities and multiple issues to deal with. So obviously I would say that they would fall into the category of representation to some extent, but obviously it's not always possible to do full justice to the kind of rehyphenated presentation that they're doing, because in a way they are still in some kind of an in-between place, because they are, kind of like in a place between their Pakistani and American or British heritage, and they would always have to deal with the kind of nuances or the kind of differences that comes with such subject position.
Right. Oh yeah, that's great answer. And also like the Hollywood itself, right? This is made by the money of Hollywood, and with a lot of non-Pakistani ancestor heritage, the staffs and members, right? So yeah.
Yeah. And also interestingly, the house that they actually talked about, the Nani's house in Karachi, all of those locations actually were in Thailand.
Wow,
Because,
really?
yeah. So it's about creating an imaginary space and like like a constructed reality, a constructed environment, and just telling the audience that it was Karachi. They obviously couldn't go and shoot in Karachi, Pakistan, due to the political turmoil that goes in there. So obviously they couldn't take risks with that. So they kind of did a makeshift Karachi in Thailand, and they just passed that as Pakistan.
Wow. Interesting. Yeah. Any other question? Yeah. Actually.
Like what would you say is the most serious implications of portraying partition wrong? Like, why is that so important for every?
So what's the most serious invocation of partition in the drama?
Like, why is it so important that needs to be portrayed, right?
Why is it so important to portray about partition in this kind of drama?
Okay, yeah. So I was reading an interview by the creator, and she said, as I mentioned, I think in one of my slides, that partition is still a defining moment for the people in the South Asian subcontinent. Because, I mean, my grandparents, they faced partition. Obviously, I didn't have to go through the first-hand impact of the partition, but in my family, my grandparents, they still talk about the kind of ordeal they had to go through. So it's like a generational story that is being passed on from one generation to another. My grandparents talked about that to my mother, my father, and now they also tell that to me. So that is like a generational thing that has been happening in the families in India and Pakistan, the South Asian subcontinent. And I think they also, the creator, they had like a twofold aim. On one hand, they probably just wanted to have this idea of this generational thing in the drama, as well as probably they also wanted to make an international audience aware of an event happening in the South Asian subcontinent or global South, an event which most of the people beyond South Asia do not have any idea about. Since Miss Marvel is about breaking stereotypes, and it's also about writing back at the canon to some extent, because they are going against the grain and they are trying to write a non-canonical history by having the brown female superhero as their protagonist. So I think they were also trying to present a different alternative version of historiography. So I think that is why it was important for the creator. And in a way, also it was like her going back to the roots as well, because most of the train related events on fourth or fifth episode in Miss Marvel, all the photographs and all the images created there, they were actually taken from an archive on the India-Pakistan partition. You can find it online. I think it's called the 1947 archive. And they actually went and digged through those photographs, and then they tried to create the event of partition.
It sounds like listening your answer to this question sounds like I just wondering, like, if you think about like the partition between South and North Korea, like it's definitely this Korean War and the breaking into two different countries in Korean history was like India and Pakistan partition. It's a like defining moment in Korean history, but still, I don't know, maybe because of like probably like one reason why South and North Korean people still consider themselves as the same ethnicity, same race, and same nationality is because first, they share a lot of history together before 1950. And also, two, I think, because still we share the same word for our ethnicity, like South and North Korean and Korean. But I'm just wondering, like, so Pakistan and India, they share this history, but at the same time, you also explained that like there are two different historiography going on in two different countries. So are they still considered like Pakistan and India and Bangladesh? They consider themselves like the same, like I don't know, like same ethnicity, same kind of like national. I don't know, like how do they like understand themselves in terms of like their identities?
Okay, I mean, so for Bangladesh and India, they are still like kind of allies politically, and they also believe in that the notion of the shared identity, but not for Pakistan, since the partition, and I talked about the two different historiographies. So Pakistan and India, they have this very weird, if I might just for the lack of better word, term it as like a love-hate relationship, because India and Pakistan, they have completely different political notions and ideas about everything. So they're still at like loggerheads, blaming each other for everything. And of course, the most political debate about this is the occupation of Kashmir. I'm not sure if you're aware of that. This is like a land between India and Pakistan, and both the Indian army and Pakistani army, they are trying to colonize the land, but they have been trying to do that since 1960s. And obviously the debate is still going on who that particular place belongs to. So that in a way has created this very weird kind, strange kind of a relationship. So obviously you won't see Indians or Pakistanis in general talking about any shared identity existing anymore. And I would blame the partition and obviously the capriciousness of the political leaders who actually made the decision of separating the two continents. And also another quick fact, the love interest of Aisha in Miss Marvel, I'm blanking on his name, but he's a Pakistani actor, very, very famous one, Fawad Khan, who actually played Aisha's husband. He used to work in Indian movie industries, but because of the estrangement that Pakistan and India are having, he, along with all other Pakistani actors, have been barred from acting in India. So that's fun.
Wow. So he's a Pakistani actor who was married in India.
Yeah, he used to, because the Indian movie industry is more famous than the movie industry they have in Karachi. So
Right.
obviously they try to have better options, explore better options. So he used to do movies in Indian film industry, but because of the sour relationship that India and Pakistan has, so he, along with all Pakistani artists, performers, they have been banned from performing in anything related to India, like musical, performance, movie, whatever.
I see. Anyone else?
So a lot of political tension going on.
Right. We also have to talk about the nuclear weapon that Pakistan has, right? Like India is obviously one of the richest and powerful country in the world, so it makes sense they have like nuclear. But Pakistan is also one of the very few countries that has nuclear, right? So it's like definitely creates this like tension between two countries more intense, right? So yeah. Anyone else before we say bye to Sayantika? Any final? Do you want to ask questions? Do you want to ask question, Bear? Oh, okay. Anyone? Yeah, David.
Do you see a shift with the younger generations to, I guess, like for example, I know Taiwan, a lot of the older generations still identify as Chinese, while the younger generation, they identify strictly as Taiwanese. And then in Korea as well, like there's been mixed feelings about things like reunification mixed between like the generational gap. Do you see any sort of change in the younger generation and their thoughts between the separation of Pakistan or India, or do you think it's relatively the same throughout the generations?
I wouldn't think so, because as I said, that my grandparents, they still talk about partition. And honestly, if I tell my grandparents that I have Pakistani friends, they would be a little apprehensive about it. And I probably cannot blame them because of all the trauma they went through and the violence inflicted on them. But at the same time, the younger generation, they do not exactly identify with that kind of trauma that happened in 1947. For the starter, I have friends from Pakistan in the United States, and we never talk about partition. And I believe that that is a change that is happening in the contemporary generation, because it happened almost 3 generations ago. It's still there. People still talk about that. But I think it's a welcome change, or a change in a positive direction, because the younger generation, they do not hold on to the obsolete idea of hating everyone from Pakistan or vice versa.
There was wonderful questions and answers. Okay, so we have last person who wants to ask a question. Yeah. Hello.
Hi.
I think we can kind of both agree that like TV and media has like a really big influence on especially how young kids view new cultures and communities like that. So my question is, do you think it's good that like productions like Marvel and this show are like making like shows and representing these cultures and running the risk of maybe incorrectly representing some factors, kind of like the ones that you've been talking about? Or do you think like it's good that they're even like making or showing a glimpse to these young kids?
Um, I'm being optimistic, so I'll probably side with the second aspect of your question. I would say that it's still a positive glimpse, I would say, because the representational issue of the communities beyond the white community, specifically South Asian communities, it has always been problematic. And I think it's really, really a great change that they are doing, in spite of taking, as you have mentioned, in spite of inaccurately portraying some of the very significant historical events. But in spite of that, I'm sure there are people beyond the South Asian community who actually, or at least got to know about the idea of partition and how that impacted an entire generation and possibly the generations after. Not exactly related to Miss Marvel, but I think this highlighting different races and different genders, minority communities, it's also becoming recurrent in other productions apart from Hollywood. I'm thinking on the top of my head about this show called Bridgerton. I think one of the female protagonists, I'm blanking on her name again, she is from the South Indian community in India. And she beautifully represents the different skin color, women of color, different race, and everything in an all-white British environment. So obviously, I'd say that it's a positive change.
Right. I think I want to have this conversation like all day. It's so interesting, but I think like discussion between like quantity over quality, right? But like the incorrect understanding about South Asian community and South Asian history is already out there. But if we don't have any representation, any films, any visibility in the United States, then there is no chance to even have a conversation whether what's wrong or what's right? So now we have this Ms. Marvel out there. Now we have this opportunity, this beginning moment to talk about, oh, this is incorrect, this is correct. So maybe, yeah, I agree. Like this could be a positive starting point.
Yeah, they would always have scholars like you and me to come up with criticism and tell them what exactly they got wrong. And again, in a positive light, the creators said that they admitted that they got some of the partition history wrong, and they would probably work on that and try to rectify if there is another series coming up, or maybe in the next Marvel movie where Kamala Khan is a character.
Right. It's such a big hit. So maybe there will be a second season, right? Hopefully.
Hopefully.
Yeah. So thank you so much for joining us today. It was a wonderful talk. So yeah, can I share your email address with my student if there is any, just in case there is any student who wants to ask you questions or emails?
Yeah, sure. And it was all my pleasure. And thank you for asking all the insightful and wonderful questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you.